thank you everyone for coming to today's session, Data Migration Removing the Risk, and I'd like to also welcome those of you that are online in our virtual audience. My name is Frank Dravis. I am the Director of Strategic Programs at Utopia. We are a data consulting firm, data management. We offer end-to-end solutions consulting, everything from data capture through management, migration, all the way through legacy system decommissioning and archiving. We've won numerous awards on our services components, and what I'm going to talk to you about today is some of the experiences that we've had in conducting data migrations. We've done over 300 data migrations in the past 3 years, in and out of different forms and versions of SAP ECC or other SAP applications. And so data migration it's a complex process. In and of itself, it can be logically done. And what it's basically about is 1,000 discrete steps that you need to do in order. And if you get those steps out of order, then the thing is going to run amok. And one of the key components of doing a data migration is what I call, what a friend of mine, Rich Trapp at Avaya, formerly from Avaya, calls the pick and shovel work of doing the business rules development and making sure you capture those. So, and on this slide here, it just shows you one of the many process flow charts that you'll have in a data migration project, and that's a high-level summarization. So if you've conducted a data migration or you're about to do one, you can expect at some point in that project to hear one of these 9 different statements. The first one is, profile the data? Why? It's just going to slow us down. Or the next one, we'll rely on the legacy system's data quality, IT cleansed it. The next one is, everyone knows the business rules, we don't need to redefine them. Or this one, define the target system purpose? Why? We already know what that is, we just need to upgrade or migrate the application. Data governance, everyone works on it, it's gotten us this far, works just fine. Do that in extra coding, that function's built into the ETL tool, it's automatic. Or the business subject matter experts are too busy to work with us on building out the business rules, IT will represent them. Or how about data validation? We can do that at the end, we have the time. And then the last one is, we can test with a subset of the data. We don't need to load all the data until the very end. Well, we're going to explore each of those 9 different statements. You know, so, and what we're after is offering you the tools to mitigate the risks that those 9 statements are kind of alluding to. You know, it's like, because if you don't mitigate those risks, we're going to be sub-optimizing our delivered system. We're going to have a failed deployment, certainly cost overruns and maybe schedule overruns. So data profiling, is it really necessary? Well, I get to ask this question, if we don't profile our data before we do the migration, how do we know what's worth moving? How do we know what we have to cleanse? How do we know how dirty the data is? I mean, because without profiling the information, we're conducting the operation in the dark. And so the mitigation here is profile every table you extract, report the results to the business, and use those results in the subsequent process of the migration effort, such as business validation. Profiling kicks off the process. Next one is, the legacy system's data quality is good enough, IT has cleansed that data already. Okay, fine. I applaud IT for doing their best on the data, but did they cleanse all of the data necessary? Under what context did they cleanse the data? Under what set of business rules did they cleanse the data? Almost always, they did it on a point project basis and not with the larger scope of the data migration framework in mind. So the mitigation for this particular risk is use your profiling results, your business rules, and your functional requirements to come up with your data cleansing rules so that you actually have cleansed data to load into your system. Do not rely on what IT did before that event. Okay, so the business rules. Everyone knows them. Why do we need to define them? Well, I like to ask, who is everyone? I mean, the simple question is, what's the definition of a customer? You can have 5 different definitions of the customer, maybe more, maybe less, and they'll all be accurate given the context. Okay, what you have to do is agree on when you come into a meeting room, which definition of customer you're going to use, under what context. And so, if someone states a rule, write it down. Because then once you write that rule down, you can develop a rule to test it when you're migrating the data. So the key here is if anyone says, well, the data should be like that, it must be written down. Otherwise, you've got a gap in the information that you're going to be migrating. So the next one here, target purpose stays the same, all right? We don't need to worry about, functional requirements. Well, that's just lovely, but every time we do a systems migration or an application migration, it opens up the opportunity to add new functionality, improve the existing functionality, rectifying old system problems and performance issues. So the mitigation here is, don't start your data requirements process until you've outlined your functional requirements, because the functional requirements will certainly provide demand on your data. Because if you've added a new key function like we want to have SKU codes embedded with the product at the point of sale, that may not have been a requirement previously, a functional requirement previously, which foists new efforts or new demands on your data. So the next one here, data governance, and it's a favorite topic of mine. The organization, even if you don't have a formal data governance process, you are indeed practicing data governance. Decisions around your data are being made. The question is, how effective are they? How much churn is involved in getting the rules right, the policies, the guidelines, the roles? How long did it take to create those rules? So the question becomes, yeah, all right, so how well did that entire process work? And so when you're doing a large-scale systems migration into ECC, oftentimes people recognize the danger around the lack of a more formal and structured data governance program, and so they will form a data governance subcommittee or subgroup, at least just for the scope of that ECC or other systems migration. So the mitigation here for the data governance risk is establish a formal data governance subgroup just for that system, and it's to focus on the issues and the decisions that must be made, because every time you're moving data all day long, business decisions, requirements are going to be foisted up through the business process owners, and someone needs to understand and make those decisions in a timely manner. And if they don't know they're responsible for that, you're going to cascade schedule slippage all throughout the project because you're waiting on Susie Q to come back from vacation to make that decision that she never knew she had to make. All right, so the next one here. Well, we can do a lot of those things in the ETL tool. Be careful about that. That's a blind assertion made. Not all ETL tools are created. And when you're doing data migrations or integrations into the SAP ecosystem, some ETL tools are better than others because of their embedded integrations and connections. For example, SAP Data Services is just perfect for doing that sort of migration integration work. So when you hear someone say, well, we can do that in the tool, verify that. The risk mitigation here is don't assume all tools are created equal, especially within those SAP ecosystems, all right? Do your technical due diligence. The 7th risk, all right, is the business SMEs are too busy, IT can speak for them. In a lot of ways, I think this is the biggest risk because you'll get 3/4 of the way through the data migration project and you'll have whole sets of data that are being loaded with no business validation rules centered around them. And it's because the finance head or the manufacturing head or the sales head never really had a time to sit down and work through the justification and the validation of the various business data sets. And IT will stand up for them, and IT will say, well, Sales use the data this way, and we've implemented data quality functions around it that way, but that's only half the picture. Sales does not make their living, IT does not make their living off of the data. The business does. IT makes their living by supporting and provisioning the data, but when you're doing a systems migration, those data requirements often change and old problems become refocused and are percolated and brought up to greater visibility. So the mitigation here is engage the business users early, get commitment to their attendance, schedule their time relentlessly, and explore the uniqueness of their business with them. And I'm serious, when you start your data migration project, you have to work with the subject matter experts and you have to tell them, for some of you, it's going to be a full-time job. You have to give us, 20 hours a week just to work through the various points that we're talking about. When you're doing 138 different objects, migration in the ECC, across 7 different business units, you've got a lot of business owners that are involved, from the very senior level down to the IT analyst level. So you need to make sure that they're engaged and are providing you the content. Okay, the 8th risk here is, data validation can be saved for the end. The end of what? By then you've loaded junk. How much time do you think you're going to have at the end to actually cleanse your data and validate the data? Because any defects you find, you've got to record the business rules, you've got to run them against your data, and then you have to do the data cleansing. And so as you can see here on your chart, the various transformation successes, the reason why you're down to 29% is that you didn't capture the business rules up front. And if you don't do this early on, and you wait for, trial data conversion cycle 3, or what they call integration test cycle 3, you've blown your schedule. So you need to validate the data every step of the way. And by validate, I mean check it against your business rules, and if it's wrong, you post it into your error log file, and then you add a data cleansing rule for the remediation and cleansing of that information. So the mitigation specifically is validate the data at every step of the way. In the QA process, in TDC1, TDC2, TDC3. Because what we want to make sure when we go live that we don't have any data validation issues, that we're loading 100% of the data and not 50% of the data. When you hear data migration project success, we were on schedule. Okay, so the next question you ask is, how much of the data did you load? And when they say, well, we loaded 86% of the data, that's when you know you had a data validation failure, because that other 14% of the data, they pulled it from the source systems, but it was junk. Why was it junk? Well, no validation rules, because by the definition, ECC will throw out some of this data that didn't meet config. For those of you who know ECC, there's an old saying, config is a litmus test for data migration. If data won't pass configuration for those configuration tests built into ECC, you know your data validation portion of your data migration has failed. So the next one is, or the last one, we can test with the sample, but I offer you, if you test with sample data throughout, you're only sampling your defects. And that means when you're loading your data in ITC1, you're using it with the sample. Okay, fine. And then ITC2, you're using a bigger sample, fine. And then maybe ITC3, you're up to 50% of your data. Well, that means that when you go live, that's the first time that you used the whole data set. But go live is not supposed to be a test. If you do it with sampling of data all the way through, go live is now a test, and that's not the way it's supposed to be. So, TDC1, when you're doing master data, do it with all of your master data. TDC2, when you're doing it with your transactional data, use all of your transactional data. And TDC3, when you're loading in your historical data, use it with all of your historical data. And people say, well, we don't have enough time to run with all of our data. We have to use sample data. Well, then you've already blown your project schedule. don't think you're going to maintain your project schedule at the end when you try and load all the data. It was inaccurately scoped from the beginning, okay? Do it with all of your data as you move through. So, with that, I just want to close this with the end here, and that is understand your data migration risks, because the project is an implementation of your corporate strategy. Because what you're after is gaining a competitive advantage through better data collection, better access to your data, better management of your data, better reporting and better analysis. And so, just to kind of recap, those 9 risks for your data migration project are: did not profile the data, relied on legacy systems data quality, did not rigorously define the business rules, assumed that the data requirements stayed the same, you left the data governance process to ad hoc management. In other words, how it would happen the same old way, hoping that someone would pick up the meeting in the middle of the project, schedule the meeting when it was needed, and make the decision when they thought it was needed, which seldom meets your project requirements. Expected the ETL tool to do more than it's really designed to do or was efficient at. Yes, there are some things the ETL tool can do, but is it really efficient and effective at it doing that particular thing? There are some things that can be done orders of magnitude faster if you had just used the right tool to begin with. Counted on IT to cover for business the requirements. Left data validation till the end. And last but not least, conducted test loads with only a small subset of the data. And so with that, I'd like to thank you for coming to today's session, both you that are here in person and in virtual online. If you have any questions, we can move the conversation to the Q&A area next door there in the Partner Center. And so thank you very much for attending. Appreciate it.